Hi, everyone. We are just getting started here. So I'm going to just do my little song and dance while we let people filter in. But how many of these webinars have we all been to or done where nobody's speaking in the first 30 seconds and you're not even sure that they're real people? So we are real people and we are ready for a good conversation today. We're just going to let people kind of filter in for a few minutes. I am going to make sure that the chat and the Q&A are both open. You should be able to chat with, now you can chat with everyone in the chat function. And I'll reiterate this in the introductions, but we also have a Q&A. We also are going to be looking at the Q&A feature throughout. So if you have specific questions, rather than chatting back and forth with each other, please put them in the Q&A so that we can keep track of questions to put towards the panelists. And we will get going in just another minute or two. I'm going to just kind of let people filter in. But I'll introduce myself. I'm Meredith Schweitzer. I am one part of the Riot Mind Agency, an integrated communications firm that focuses on space industry clients. And we are the support arm, one of the supports for Hyperspace Challenge. And for those of you who are less familiar with Hyperspace Challenge, most of us, I think, are, but Hyperspace Challenge is a business accelerator and run by the Air Force Research Lab. And I see Kelly, our senior program director, is in the chat, and you can say hi to her and ask her questions. And I also see that Demetria is in the chat as well, who can be available if you have any questions as we go through. She's going to have some good links to share out if we need to, and also can kind of point you in the right direction. If you are attending for the first time a Hyperspace Challenge webinar, we'd love to know that. And also, we'd love to know who you're with and where you're watching from. That'll help us kind of know where to guide the questions as we go. So we'll go ahead and get started. Today, I was saying to the panelists before we got on, this is a really interesting webinar, I think, in this series. We've been doing conversations mostly with US-based entities about US-based opportunities, and sometimes there are chances to talk about what a global presence really means, or what working across nations within the industry looks like. But I think that today's conversation is going to be particularly fun because we're turning the tables a little bit to really get to understand a little bit better what the opportunities are in the European market. We're going to be very UK heavy, but I think that some of the conversation will extend beyond that, obviously. And we're going to talk about ways that US-based companies or non-European companies can get involved in the industry and what the kind of opportunities are. I think that the other thing that we want to mention is that if you're not already following Hyperspace Challenge on LinkedIn or any of our panelists, they all have a good LinkedIn presence, and we will hopefully I'll link to their LinkedIn profiles, or you can look them up and connect with them for any follow-up. And lastly, just to reiterate for the folks who joined a little late, please put your questions in the Q&A function, and I may pepper those in throughout, but I may save them sort of towards the end. So you'll want to stay till the end if you're able. And I think we can get going here. I do want to personally thank Andy Oliver for connecting us with today's panelists from the European kind of market. He is a wonderful colleague of ours, also in the PR and marketing industry, UK based, and we really love working with them. So thank you, Andy, and thank you to our panelists for bringing your knowledge to the community today. So we're going to start with some brief introductions, and then we've got a series of questions. Again, we can pepper in audience questions, so please don't be shy. And nobody's typing. Oh no, people are telling us where they're from. Good, keep going. let's start. I'm going to do a little round robin and let the panelists introduce themselves. They all have very extensive resumes, so I told them I'd like them to identify one or two key points to kind of give a who you are statement, and then we'll go from there. So Anushka, do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. Good evening from London. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be across the US and maybe beyond as well. Please do call me Nush. I'm the founder of Naught, a space tech and innovation consultancy that I founded coming up to 10 years ago. And I am also the co-founder of the London Space Network, alongside Manny, who will also probably touch on that too. We set that up 5 years ago as a way to bring together and strengthen the UK space community by having a very quintessential meetup in a pub every month in London. And I'm currently, as of 18 months ago, based at Space Park Leicester, where I manage the Space Academic Network, which is otherwise known as SPAN. And what we do is provide a voice for UK academia and space scientists into government and also into industry to kind of align our values. And there are various technical working groups from science, engineering and technology to space exploration, data and analytics, space and society, which is one of the newer ones, because we're really seeing a trend of like non-technical academics really wanting to join the conversation in the space sector. So with that, I'll hand back over to you, Meredith. Delighted to be here.
Manny, do you want to go?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Manny Shah. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at OrbitFab. Previously, I set up and grew the OrbitFab UK office. I'll talk about that later. And also Bryce Tech. And then before that, I was at Inmarsat. I sit on a number of advisory boards and committees, including the UK Space Technology Advisory Council and the International Astronautical Federation. As Nush mentioned, I'm one of the 3 co-founders of London Space Network, and recently will be, or in short order, moving to the States. Kind of switching it from the UK life to the US life. Excited about that, and excited about this panel. So look forward to it.
Great, thank you. We're so glad you're here, Manny. Robin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and good afternoon from Munich. So, Meredith, I need to contradict you. We're not very UK-centered or focused because I'm sitting here in Munich, or close to Munich, so outside of the UK. I said, my name is Robin, so I joined Sexavolt in 2017, so I consider myself nearly as a founding member. And my role is here to basically develop the commercial activities, to be in touch with the launch service providers, and to make sure that everybody wants to launch from us and not has to launch from us. So there's a slight difference or nuance, as I was told. So that's in a nutshell my role. And as a background, so previously I'm not from the space industry before, so I was in London, actually, in the financial industry or in the financial markets. I founded a family office for 10 years, or 7 years, sorry, before joining Sexavolt. So
I think you and Manny both have you have some finance in your background, both of you, right? Okay.
We saw the light and joined this space industry.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought we would start with just some broad strokes, and then we can kind of do more deep dives. Manny, I want to start with you. Can you talk about the London Space Network and really give us kind of an overview? And also if you can pepper in there, ways that non-London based people can be involved, or what resources it might have.
Yeah, I might pass that one to Nush. So recently, just so you know, my wife, who's the 3rd co-founder of London Space Network, she got an amazing job in California, which prompted the move to the States, by the way. And so myself and her are moving to the States and no longer able to take London Space Network, continue to take that forward. But yeah, I'll let Nush talk more. It's a fantastic, if you're ever in London, and if you're ever it's a very informal kind of gathering. It sells out every time, really, really popular. But I'll let Nush jump in on that point.
I have to say that the success of the London Space Network has been testament to my two co-founders, Harriet and Manny. We sat at the IET, the Institute of Engineering and Technology, in a cold December morning in 2018 and decided that the following January in 2019, we'd kick off with our first meetup in a pub called The Astronomer, which was near Liverpool Street Station. And what we've done since, with a little brief hiatus because of the COVID pandemic, we've had a monthly meetup in a different pub around central London, in different areas of central London, to make it as accessible as possible. And funny story is that Harriet, Manny and I, each working in 3 different parts of the space sector, as friends, we kept meeting each other across the wide array of space events and conferences around the world. And we'd often meet up not in London. In fact, we always met up not in London. And it struck us that it felt odd that we weren't meeting more locally to us. And as someone who joined the space sector 10 years ago, I was in my 30s, I was bootstrapping my way to access a lot of these international events because I was above the age restrictions where you sometimes can access the young professional bursaries and sort of slightly more cheaper entry and access to events. So, you know, meeting people and growing a network of, you know, early career professionals, students, rocket scientists, we've got astronauts, we have startup founders, we have people who work for primes. It is a really big and diverse community that's very peer-to-peer, in that we all stand on a sticky floor in a pub every month and catch up. And it's a really great opportunity to share lessons, find a mentor, keep people up to date and build like an accountability partner, but equally just meet a friendly face in the space sector that gets what you do. Because I'm sure for many of us, there's this weird duality that we have where people might question you, friends and family and extended networks who don't quite understand why you bother to work in the space sector. And it's something I particularly face. So in my day job, I get to talk about roadmaps to the moon and Mars and beyond. And often it's a very humbling activity when I'm meeting friends and family at dinner and they're like, well, why is it important to go to space? So having a safe space and also an open space that's accessible to anyone across their career path and even people looking to pivot into the space sector. As Manny says, we'd love to extend an invitation for you to join us if you're in town when we run one.
I love that. I mean, there's a couple of things that I think are so interesting and I noticed that Andy's popping in the chat right now, the LinkedIn profiles for our panelists. So thank you, Andy, and feel free to link through to those if you're watching. There are 2 things that I think are really great about what you just said. One is, you know, we're always talking with clients about how you kind of extend the networking that you're able to do at industry conferences, because the space industry is such a heavy conference-based in-person industry. And I love the concept of in-person, more casual conversations, because that really is where you learn what people are doing. And for US-based companies, you know, there are some great organizations that are doing similar kinds of programs. I actually think that Payload's efforts to do in-person regional get-togethers have been really successful. So if you're not following Payload, that's a great resource for ways to get together in person regionally. Okay, I think that was really interesting. I mean, what a great resource for the community there. I'm curious. I want to get. I'm going to go back to Manny here. Actually, Manny, I was looking up before. You know, as part of the research, I was kind of thinking about your timeline a little bit, and the fact that you were really with Bryce Tech as it was becoming a global kind of presence. And I think that in the same way, it seems like the work that you've done with Orbit Fab, which for people watching that may not be as familiar, which how are you not familiar with Orbit Fab, but they were originally a US based, and now I believe they have a UK, and I want to say there's another country too. Am I right about that part?
Just the UK one for now,
Just
but we are looking at other places potentially. Yeah.
Oh, we're announcing today. No, I'm just kidding. I'm really curious to hear from you, having that unique perspective of being in 2 separate companies that really tackled the global questions. What thoughts you have, maybe some things that you saw that sort of like advice for companies. I'm going totally off script here, by the way. This was not one of the questions I gave him in the script, of what advice you kind of have that you saw as companies went from a, you know, single kind of government and requirements space to now we need to be really thinking internationally. Like, what kinds of things come to mind? What kind of advice do you have for companies that might be in that position, that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, yeah, this was actually, so OrbitFab is the second US headquartered company I've helped found in the UK. Previously, Bryce-Tech, so that UK London was the first international office for Bryce-Tech as well. I kind of have started to have this habit of found US companies in the UK, which is great, a huge learning opportunity. And you know, from the situation of I guess can use each of those examples. Bryce-Tech was at this phenomenal growth stage where, you know, the US market they're really familiar with, they kind of been well known in the US. Europe itself has a lot of kind of potential and growth in terms of space. Lots of government budgets were growing for space, and then and it just made a lot of sense from, you know, where when it comes to advisory services, you know, government companies, that if, especially for an expert kind of like consultants like Bryce-Tech, where they bring in experts in propulsion, experts in you know, finance, investment, to really kind of piece that together for different kind of stakeholders and customer groups. So that kind of expertise and skill is really sought after. So it was kind of a natural next step for Bryce-Tech to set up a new office in London, and London being a great kind of place for attracting talent. You know, lots of important customers based in and around the area. UK Space Agency's headquarters were there, for example, and so that made a lot of sense. And then kind of more generally, the UK is a great landing pad for US companies looking to go global, right? You've got the nexus of the kind of the European market, and then more broadly the international market into Asia and beyond. So it's a nice kind of little stepping stone to wider markets. And from OrbitFab's kind of situation, we were crossing this kind of point where the growth opportunities were continuing, and we were in the process of raising our Series A, and things were really looking good. And having a UK office has cemented our kind of that momentum, because we've been able to secure significant revenue and income over the last couple of years now. Grown, so both companies actually have now grown into double-digit number of employees due to that success and demand that we've seen. So that kind of summarizes the experience and how it's approached. I don't know if I totally answered your question, but happy to reiterate any aspect.
What's something that you wish you had known that you know now about taking a US company international, especially to the UK? Like one little thing.
Yeah, so it kind of varies. So in terms of the Bryce-Tech experience, it was you kind of, it's consulting, so it's project based. You work with companies, investors, government, customers, and a lot of the learnings I gained from that experience was more about the US actually, and how the US approaches business, and also given that it's the biggest global kind of space market, I got to interact with lots of amazing folks through that. I got to meet huge, highly talented people, and that opened my eyes to what the kind of the general space market, what opportunities there are. And with OrbitFab, it kind of pinpointed for me like the technology kind of area, specific technology area, where I was able to dig deep and really understand what it's like we are creating a new market, right? In orbit refueling has never been done before. So we're really kind of pushing the bounds of what's possible and what's been done before. So it's like it's how do you scale that commercial opportunity in a way that is sustainable in terms of kind of a financial and practical sense. So you're not you know, you've got cash flow, you're able to sustain that growth over time, hire people, get the right facilities. And so there were lots of learnings from the US that came to setting up the UK office around, for me, working with hardware was a totally new experience. And we wanted to develop hardware in the UK. And that was, for me, really important because building capabilities domestically is really kind of valued. You generate IP, and there's a lot of support for that. So understanding that, and then from the talent side, understanding the kinds of skill sets we would want, and the facilities we need to look for. All of that kind of came together. Was really helpful from knowing how the US office did it, and the lessons learned, and how certain things that you should avoid, or you shouldn't do, or do differently. So it really helped me having that kind of backing of the US office and that experience that they had, that I was able to kind of put forward into the UK entity. So that there's different kinds of experiences in that sense. Bryce provided more of the strategy and consulting and understanding how to approach more generally setting the priorities, planning, and make sure that we're focusing on the right areas as well. Mm-hmm. And then understanding also how to communicate the importance of what we were trying to do to a government audience, which a lot of the projects we did at Bryce were for the government audience. So there's kind of different dimensions to the experience and how that was able to help in the UK. So, sorry, that was a bit of a long answer.
I think there were some good nuggets in there. I think that was a good kind of broad answer too. And I'm going to come back to a couple of the points that you're making, but I want to get Robin into the conversation. So Robin, I want to pass it over to you and get you to give us like a little bit of kind of an overview of Saxaboard, but also a Saxaboard Spaceport, but also, how you partner with US based companies, what kind of opportunities there might be, and really just give you an opportunity to talk about the work that you do and give some thoughts.
Broad question. No, I'm trying. So, well, with Saxaboard, obviously, we are already in touch with the US, as you may know. Right. The Pathfinder launch, which is basically funded by the UK government, has been awarded to Lockheed Martin UK. And Lockheed Martin UK is partnering with Firefly. Partnered with Firefly, now is partnering with ABL. So we are already in talks and in discussions with US launch service providers, which means that we have a natural approach to the US market, just by virtue of that. The other point is also, which helps us a lot, is that I would say the cultural proximity between the UK and the US. So I think some may say that whilst basically everyone in the US is a descendant from the UK, but nowadays it seems to be different, that the UK is the smaller partner of the US or an outpost, let's say, of the United States here in Europe. So what I'm meaning is that there are cultural proximities which you can use here. And then Saxaboard then basically for the US companies is extending into Europe. So as I said, I'm sitting in Munich, so we have offices in the European Union outside of the UK. And we are firmly established within the European market. So to give you an example, I was talking with the CEO of the French Space Agency, and he established that Europe has 3 major spaceports, which is French Guiana, which is actually on the other side of the Atlantic, Saxaboard, and Andoya, which is in Norway, which is actually outside of the EU as well. So that just shows you, just as an example of how we are seen and how we are, let's say, core to the European space industry, or how we are perceived also by the space agencies. Another example is also that we are taken very serious by government. So basically, the UK, we are in very close and in regular exchange with the UK government, obviously because we are also seen as critical infrastructure. And since I'm sitting in Germany, so I have done more work on the German government. The German government and the Bavarian government are seeing the critical infrastructure topic and angle as well. Yeah, I think that covers it. And last but not least, also because I always only spoke about the spaceport, we are also operating a ground station, which is still only one ground station in Shetland. But we are in the final stages of building and putting into operation a ground station in the US. So there again, we will have US operations. Yeah, so we're basically the bridge between on the Atlantic.
Yeah, that's a really good summary. And you know, you're making me think. One of the things that we talk about sometimes in these webinars are sort of where the bottlenecks are in the industry, and you know, the number of spaceports is something that comes up sometimes, just, you know, across conversations. And at your point of pointing to the fact that Europe has 3 spaceports and listing them off, you know, I'm curious if this is not a very guided question, but I'm just sort of curious what you see as, you know, bottlenecks for you in the work that you do now. I mean, is it more getting people through the regulations, or the regulations more stringent for you than they would be in a US-based spaceport? Or, you know, what are kind of bottlenecks that you guys like to bring to the fore that you think need to be addressed in some capacity?
So first of all, just for everybody, so I was reading, and everybody can find it on the internet. There is a report from Morgan Stanley which claims that I think we all know it, by 2040 the space industry will be worth $1 trillion.
Right.
And I was interested to see how big the market share of that is actually for launch providers or launch services. I will not let you guess. Basically, the answer is that by 2040 the portion of the launch services will be $9.7 billion, which is less than 1% of the overall space industry. However, without this 0.9%, the other 99.03% will do not happen. So that just shows you that spaceports are actually, or launch providers or launch services are actually the bottleneck for the whole space industry. Sorry if I'm bold to everybody, but I'm just quoting figures. Why spaceports are a bottleneck is basically the virtue of the activities. So you need a clean downrange and you need a clear airspace. So now try to see on the globe, on a map, where you have clear sea space or clear downrange without any chances of hitting anyone, because that's obviously we don't want to do that, and also with interrupting at least as possible commercial air flights. So if you look at, that's why I'm saying this, in Europe, it's very difficult to find spaceports or locations for spaceports, because you will always be very disruptive to the space, to the airspace, but then also to all the sea traffic. And then in terms of bottlenecks, I think the CAA in the UK, so the UK regulator, is extremely cooperative, because I think the UK government sees the space industry as a major industry in the future. So I think that you see in the UK at least a lot of support from governmental agencies. I think, yeah. Noosh, you're sitting in London, I guess, so you can vouch for that.
Yeah, I'm curious. I kind of same question to both of you. Noosh, do you want to take some thoughts on, or give some thoughts on where you're seeing the bottlenecks, especially like from the work you're doing with academia? I'm curious if there's some areas that you've noticed that people are researching and falling into bottleneck moments, you know, in moving things forward.
I'm going to say the F word, and I apologize in advance if I offend anyone, but it's funding. In academia, one of the things that we are really struggling with in the UK is access to funding. Now, we are in a pre-election period, which means some of the programs that we've really had incredible access to funding to provide collaborative bilateral science missions, as well as international bilateral funds. And some of the projects, I can type the names in the chat so that you can look up examples, have incorporated collaborations internationally between space agencies like NASA and JAXA with universities across the UK. And that's been really great to kind of really show where we can showcase British instrumentation design and implementation, which is really one of our incredible capabilities, in particularly coming out of academia in the UK. But student fees in the UK for many years have been frozen. And so with other geopolitical things that have happened, like Brexit, and some of the immigration challenges we've had, it's been harder for international students to potentially access places at universities, which is where the money for R&D would come from to help universities reinvest. So now we have to look at more creative ways to build collaborations with our industrial counterparts, but also look at the international opportunities with things like the UK Space Agency's International Bilateral Fund and the Space Agency's Science Innovation Bilateral Fund. So, you know, no matter what happens with the election outcome next week, I really hope that we drive this strategy. And one of the things we formed in the UK is the Space Partnership, of which academia and SPAN is representative, with another organisation called SUN, which is the Space Universities Network, which look at the sort of professional end of academia and what we need to develop on the skill side of space and science research. And that's the Space Partnership is a partnership which has had many iterations over the years, but it's a collaboration between industry, government and academia. And it's been really interesting sitting on the working board group, because I've really been able to like witness firsthand, like I say tension, but it's not, because I think any time that you're trying to innovate, honestly, difficult conversations need to happen and everyone needs to understand every stakeholder's position. And currently, because of the general election, the way that we were engaging was on existing policy from the government perspective. So one of the things we've been working on is the space science roadmaps and the space capabilities, of which there are 22 that have been identified by the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. And we with SPAN have really been driving access to the conversations, the workshops and the roundtables to really get that grassroots feedback of what can we do to access the opportunities to really like, and hopefully in that collaboration between industry, government and academia, but equally industry and academia who also want to innovate. And I think giving an example is when I worked in high performance computing, one of the things we were really able to do was edge the design of supercomputers and really working with chip manufacturers and optimizing codes to really look at the algorithmic advantages that we were driving through science research that was making physics work in a most incredible way. And often a lot of these findings can be hidden away in science papers. So I think we all have a responsibility to communicate the advantages of what these collaborations are showing and where they're driving innovation, because they have applications outside of the space sector. And that's what's going to help drive us all and the business opportunities if we can create access to opportunities across every sector, because they're all serviced by space. As Robin, as you said, it's a critical infrastructure space. It certainly has been identified as one of the 13 critical infrastructures for the UK. So I'll pause there and see if anyone else wants to jump in.
Noosh, let me ask you, if someone wants to learn more about the 22 things that have been identified and that sort of work that you're doing, where should they go? Where can they learn more about that specific line of what you're talking about?
So because so it's this really funny environment we're in at the moment because of this pre-election period. So I would say let the dust settle of the election next week, and then whoever forms the new government, they will be driving the agenda of like what they get and pick up on. This work is still happening behind the scenes, and particularly on the science roadmaps and the science and space exploration roadmaps, we're about to go into a period of consultation. So if in those specific areas there's something that, so things like strategy of going to the moon, Mars, looking at low Earth orbit, and other areas, ping me in the chat here or send me a message. When we open that up for wider consultation, I can let you know. But these are things that the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology will be driving more publicly for that engagement. But the Space Partnership is a way, if you're from industry, particularly if you're in the UK, that you could get involved in the process. At the moment, I'm not sure if they're letting new people in, but there's no harm in asking. So if I can help connect the dots on that, I'm happy to help.
Great, great. And Manny, let's hear from you on kind of the bottlenecks question. But I think one of the things I value so much about your perspective, and I hate to just sort of like, you know, keep pounding on it, is that you really do have the straddling the US and UK market in particular. You know, I'm curious about less about industry bottlenecks and more about how issues with expanding, you know, globally, where are the bottlenecks in that process?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think some of the challenges and bottlenecks that I've seen tend to be interlinked. So there's firstly, you want to grow, right? You want to be able to grow the presence that you have, and fundamentally, it all is about the people, right? If you want to build capability, you need to hire, and in order to hire, you need to have the right reasons to A, set up an office there, and B, to even grow that office. And you know, it ties into what kind of support there is in that environment. So in, you know, the UK's case, the UK Space Agency has been tremendously supportive to us from the outset, both at Orbit Fab and also previously Bryce Tech, where we were just setting up, and they've kind of always been a great help in growing our presence. And part of the challenge has been for us, we're developing technology that's not really been developed before. So that government R&D funding needs to be there, and it needs to be enabling that future commercial market. So I'd say there's been less bottlenecks necessarily kind of from a UK funding standpoint. It's been more around some of the more challenge I've seen is around European Space Agency, not to name specifically, but that's from my experience, where it takes a lot longer to you know, secure funding and make progress. And part of the challenge relates to the notion of kind of something not being invented here, essentially, is the way I like to say it. So it's for the UK has been very supportive to having companies from around the world set up. There's Japanese companies here, you know, Australian, a number of different companies from all around the world. And when kind of trying to navigate that ESA world, it's interesting because there, you know, there's a level of kind of political aspects, right? There's the notion of geo return, so you know, being able to, which means that member states invest, and then they expect that certain return to come back to those member states. So if there's a tender opportunity that you know, you see, there's almost this kind of game that you have to play of, okay, this opportunity has funding from these countries. So if I am to maximize my chance of success, I need to have, let's say, you know, the UK entity, but then I also need to consider having a Portuguese entity or a Polish entity or a company, sorry, participating in that consortium, which tends to force you in some ways to a corner around. It's not necessarily about building or coming with the best solution. It's like, how are you architecting that consortium? And that can have problems because yeah, some companies are really good at that. It's you know, you build up the experience and knack for it, but it creates unnecessary complications and challenges. And it's a tricky problem, right? Because how do you convince member states to invest money and not expect that money back in some form, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's a balancing act to be had there, but that is one of the interesting kind of side effects of that whole situation is so if you are looking to navigate the ESA landscape, it does take time and dedicated resources to enable. That's probably a bottleneck that I would highlight for growing in Europe.
Robin's smiling over it does take time. Do you want to add a thought to that, Robin?
There is not much to add. I think Manny just said, so for everybody to consider coming to Europe, first of all, consider where to go. Obviously, the easy choice would be the UK because of language. But then, as Manny just mentioned, consider the geo return, which means the three biggest contributors are the UK, Germany, and France. So if I were coming over from the US, it's also basically the biggest market. So that would be the markets I would consider coming to. I'm half French, half German, so I'm impartial if you want to decide to go to France or Germany or the UK, actually working for a UK company. And many also touch base on cultural differences or the patience. I think the biggest point here in Europe is that Europe is not as risk-taking as you will be in the US. Anush said the F-word funds. Also, funds are not as widespread available here in Europe, at least private funds, not widespread available as in the US. But yeah, the patience factor plays a role as well. Just I think people here are more scared of making mistakes. And whereas what I admire in the US is you make a mistake and you learn from it, and but you don't make it twice. Here we don't want to make it once.
I think that's a really interesting perspective. And in fact, one of the questions in the Q&A was, David, thank you for this question of, is the UK open to radical innovation? And I think you kind of answered that of, sure, but, right? And I have another question that's sort of a follow-up for Manny from Daniel in the Q&A is, how have you found export regulations between US and UK? Are there any advantages to working with the UK over other governments, specifically in that vein?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's certainly something we've had to contend with, particularly as, some of Orbit Fab's technology is ITAR controlled. And so initially we set up a technical assistance agreement between the two entities, and that helped share some of that information. But even with that, we were wanting to be very careful because there's the notion of ITAR contamination. Right. So we still kind of created a big firewall between the two entities. So to ensure maximum kind of avoidance of any of those issues. And from a kind of a export control standpoint, like I obviously don't and haven't any particular experience with other nations, but I do see a lot of momentum towards changing some of that regulation coming up. There's been a lot of talk, particularly for the AUKUS nations, so Australia, UK, US. There's a really strong kind of defense alliance there, and there's a lot of talk about bringing UK and Australia into the kind of ITAR fold. I don't know what that means in practice, but there's a lot of reports on this, and it's apparently could be happening fairly soon, and so we'll have to see how that transpires. But if you're looking for countries that have closer ties, closer kind of maybe less complex challenges, then I would say UK, Australia are pretty close in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's also, I should add, and I think Robin can elaborate, the technical technology, what's it called, the TSA for launch technology?
Technology Safeguard Agreement. That's between the US and
yeah,
signed in October 2020.
Say more, Robin, for people who don't know much about that, and hopefully most of our audience already does, but go ahead and give a little.
The technology safeguard agreement is an agreement which the US has signed with very few countries. I think the UK was the first one in 2020, as said. Many you mentioned Australia. Australia signed the TSA with the US government in October 23. If I'm correct, and I think that's the only two ones existing. And the US is in negotiations with Canada that basically allows launch sensible technology to be exported to these countries. That's the first point. That's on the governmental side. And then on the corporate side, you have the TAA, the Technology Assistance Agreement, I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, which basically US companies will need to apply for with the Department for Trade, if I'm not mistaken, in the US, where basically you as a company will be allowed to export your technologies. And many just said that that does not answer any ITAR contaminations for us here.
Where it gets
And then there's
basically ITAR contamination. Sorry, go ahead.
No, just to add that there's a similar agreement between US and New Zealand as well. So that's how kind of Rocket Lab is just to highlight.
There are ways, is the point. One thing I've started doing in other programs that I really enjoy is offering an opportunity for panelists to ask each other questions. I'd love to hear, if you all have a question for each other that you'd like to ask. So Noosh, maybe I'll start with you. Is there something you've been wanting to ask, or now just from this conversation that you have for either Manny or Ruben?
I think that's a really great ask, Meredith. And actually, as we were all speaking, having known Manny a bit, he and I have both been consultants for organizations in the US and Europe, in my case, and I think maybe Manny as well down the line. And one of the things for me in my consultancy has been that exchange of ideas and really helping people establish like their mechanism within the UK, and that offers opportunities. Don't be afraid to reach out and find those consultancies or those agencies that can provide that port of call, particularly if you're in the exploratory phases. You could be coming to the UK for London Tech Week or a space conference. Don't be afraid to come, hop on a plane, be at a conference, and just survey the community. And one thing I've realized with the space sector is it's very giving, and people are very open to sharing their networks and communities and sponsoring you in many ways. But I guess the question is to like Manny and Robin, when you've been in a position to I guess open doors and connections to people, whether it's consulting or just kind of like in a pub or in a community, what's been your favorite outcome of that? Because I've had some incredible, I'll think of some examples, but I've had some really fun things happen just based on a meetup at LSN, for instance. And one thing Harriet did was introduce me to Mandala Space Ventures, who hosted our April space drinks, and they were working in partnership with the UK Space Agency, and they were looking to launch an accelerator program with the opportunity for UK startups that are early stage space companies to access California and get flown across to pitch in America. And that was a really great way and a really lovely way to bring a bit of like that America, USA and British kind of community together. And there are others, like there's lots of others, but I hope that's a question that you can both answer.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's always nice to hear from LSN, because that is a great networking opportunity, and a lot of people come up to us and say, "Oh, thanks to LSN, I found a job, or I met someone and we started a company," and it's fantastic to hear those stories, and it just kind of reinforces why we do what we do. It's like it's all about people in the industry, and how do we ensure everyone gets to accomplish what their goals are, and I think that's really powerful. So I think there's a variety of examples, but those are kind of people getting jobs, people starting companies. They're really fantastic kind of outcomes.
Do you have a good one, Robin?
Sure. No, as I said, since I'm not from the space industry, so going to conferences or meeting up with people or at exhibitions, what I find very thrilling is I can go up to everybody and everyone and ask what I think are very stupid questions, and I will be met with great patience. Everybody will be so enthusiastic of explaining what they are doing, what the products do, what the services do, and they will go into every detail. So I feel like I'm studying space, manufacturing or space engineering, just going to these conferences or to the antenna providers, for instance, or to software engineers and programmers. So yeah, that's I guess what sticks out to me. And as Nush said, it's again to everybody, indeed, just come over and get in touch with Nush and with networks here, because they really provide extremely good insight and access to targeted or specific networks, or even to agencies or to governmental bodies or to the right people within the governments. So yeah, just reinforcing what Nush and Mani said.
I think it's interesting that, you know, we talk a lot about how the US industry is so in-person networking based. You know, you really do have to have those in-person relationships, and I'm hearing that that's, you know, very much so in Europe as well. And just to plug, I know, Nush, you mentioned a couple of the conferences that are some of the bigger ones in Europe. Spacecom UK is another one that I know Andy is working on directly. And if you have questions about, we often get clients who are asking, you know, which ones are worth us going to, because it's an investment to send your team overseas. So if I would encourage attendees today, if you have questions about, you know, is it worth it to go to this or to go to that, you could reach out to these panelists or get in touch with us. We can help you, or the Hyperspace Challenge team always has kind of resources around kind of who you should be talking to and how you should be getting in touch with them. So let's see, Robin, do you have a question for your fellow panelists? Are you curious about anything?
Getting on the spot, thinking of it.
I'll come back to you. Manny, what's your question?
Yeah, I had a question. When launch?
Ah.
I was going to say ask Rocket Factory that. No, Rocket Factory Augsburg said today on another panel, actually this morning where I was, that we are aiming for third quarter.
Oh, nice.
Okay. Let's see, we have a few more minutes, so I'm going to try to get a couple of the questions that we got in the Q&A. Robin, I'm coming back to you for a question for your panelists, so be thinking.
Well, to Anush and Many, when are you coming to visit us here on Shetland? So
Oh, I'm so ready. I've been ready for even the tests that you've been running. I've been very jealous of my network sharing some of the behind the scenes on LinkedIn. I am so ready. And the Shetlands is one of the most beautiful parts of Scotland. I appreciate it's a bit of a journey, but I'm so ready for that, because these are really historic moments in UK's history and our spacefaring history. And I really look forward to the opportunities that the launch will provide, not only hopefully academia as well as the commercial enterprise, you know, parts of the space sector, but I really hope it is an opportunity to explore for academics wanting to put something into polar orbit that has a scientific return and impact back to the UK. I think that would be really great. So I'm ready. Just say when and I'll start planning.
Now I have a question to you, Nush. Sorry. So how can we as a spaceport support academia?
So come and get involved with the Space Academic Network. So I'll drop you a line about that. But I think it's about being able to communicate the opportunities to everyone, right? I think this is the thing that it's great Andy's on the call as well as an expert communicator and providing services to help people share their story of what they're doing, because the opportunities that you're going to be providing at Saxe-Award Spaceport is immense. And I think it's about people understanding the short, mid and long-term opportunities. So, you know, at the beginning, you're going to have you've got your customers already lined up. but it's a bit like when Virgin Galactic had their like drive to become future astronauts. They were building up a bank and database of like future astronauts like decades ago. So it's like, how do we find those interesting scientists or universities within the UK and Europe and further afield that are looking for these opportunities? And perhaps there are ways that we could share payload space, right? And have like an economic advantage, or maybe there's a discount for academia, you know, all of the ways that we can learn to engage and like help with these business models, we are happy to explore. And there are academics that are very interested in the rocketry in the UK launch space, particularly from a science angle, that would love to hear from your team for sure.
Robin, I've got a kind of a suggestion. I think it makes sense for the panelists and the moderator to be invited to the first launch. I think that's a part of a requirement,
sure.
right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. But I do think that there, all joking aside, that what I'm hearing too is that an academic roundtable to answer that question would be so interesting, you know, to just really get into what you know support would look like. I would certainly tune in for something like that. I think that's really a fascinating question that has lots of levels of where it could go, you know. And from the US perspective as well, I mean, get some of our US researchers and academic community involved in those conversations. So that'll be next year's webinar together. Let's see, we've just got a few minutes left, and I'm going to do one or two of these questions in the Q&A, and we may be able to just get to maybe one of them. Let's see. I've got a question from John saying, can you speak more on ITAR controls impacting the aerospace industry as it relates to new businesses wanting to get involved? This might be a little, I feel like that's a Manny question, but maybe you can rock, paper, scissors it.
I'm happy to just kind of the general kind of point of ITAR is to avoid you know arms kind of going into the wrong hands. So given space is a dual use kind of capability, rockets can go to space, but they can also kind of you know hit infrastructure, people, and there's a negative kind of aspect. So it's to avoid that being kind of proliferating into the wrong hands, that technology. That's the premise of ITAR. And then there's a kind of a list of kind of areas that ITAR covers, and you know if you can look that up, it includes launch technology and other in space related technologies, and there's a whole, I think there's a whole list out there, but that's
well, and in fact, in fact, you can go back about a year ago to the Hyperspace Challenge webinars. There was a great webinar that the team did with the Association for Commercial Space Professionals that looked specifically at some of the bigger regulation questions. And there was a whole section talking about ITAR issues for startups in particular. So I think it was about a year ago. So if you just go to the resource library, which maybe if Dimitri or Kelly are still in the chat, we can pop in the Hyperspace Challenge resource library. This has been a really interesting conversation. I'm so grateful to the three of you and to all of the attendees who have asked good questions and who have brought some interesting points to the fore here. I think there's a lot more to be discussed, and I think that the opportunities for moving the industry forward in a global sense is really imperative right now, especially, you know, given political and kind of technological circumstances. The more we can find ways to work together, the better the industry is going to be, and the better that that the options are going to be for all of us here back on Earth, obviously. So I think we have a shared mission. While the regulations may be different, I think that understanding how we can be cooperative and how we can find ways to further each other's work is really important. So I'm really grateful to you all for sharing your thoughts and giving us some perspective that is a little different than some of the conversations that we've had around very specific US opportunities. So with that, I just want to remind everyone, if you're not yet following Hyperspace Challenge on emails. I would suggest that everyone reach out via LinkedIn for the panelists. I think that maybe Noosh, did you put in somebody put in all of the handles, or maybe it was Andy. And if you're watching this after the fact, I found them all very easily on LinkedIn. So a little quick Google search should do. And if you have a specific follow-up question, you can email Hyperspace Challenge, and we can try to get it over to the panelists, obviously, as well. And lastly, these are programs that continue monthly, so please do consider, checking back on the Hyperspace Challenge website, following us on social media, and staying in touch and being part of our community, because really a lot of the work that we do is finding ways to make opportunities accessible for the broad space community. And that's all I have. So we'll end right at the top of the hour. If we didn't get to your question, I'm sorry, and hopefully we can get it answered other ways if you reach out. Thank you, everyone. And last words, panelists?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you first of all, thank you very much. And one thing which just came to mind, because you mentioned this panel actually comes at a very good timing. So Monday, the German chancellors stood on in a talk and mentioned space and artificial intelligence being the two key industries to sustain growth and sustaining our living standards, so to speak, where everybody is a little bit afraid of losing it for some reasons. So this panel comes at the right time, because it feels like every European government is seeing space as a core and key sector and industry for future growth. And I think that there's even, I would say, something like a competition between European governments of attracting space industries or space companies or space-related companies. So yeah, come over here. It's the right time.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon, evening, or morning, depending on when you're watching. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Right.